Hello and welcome to this short screencast on learning theories. This screencast will provide you with an overview of some of the key learning theories that have influenced current teaching practice and prompt you to reflect on their relevance to your own teaching in higher education in the 21st century. Following this session, which includes both this screencast and the associated classroom activity, you will be able to demonstrate your understanding of the key aspects of several learning theories and identify how they inform your teaching practice, and reflect on whether they accurately describe the learning behaviour that you observe in your teaching practice. We will also consider the extent to which the theories postulated over the 19th and 20th century are relevant to today's learning environments. In order to teach effectively, to design and plan teaching sessions, courses and programs, it is important to have an understanding of how people learn. Learning is fundamental to human society and the growth of civilization, and as such it has long been the focus of scholarly discourse. Whilst we will not go back as far as Aristotle or Confucius, we will start with Pavlov's behaviourist theories, developed at the turn of the 20th century. Theories which were then revised by Piaget, who recognised that human superior intelligence meant that they approached learning in a different way to most other animals. And on to Vygotsky's work, which suggested that knowledge was constructed rather than acquired. This was further developed by Kolb in his recognition that learners needed time to reflect after activities. And later theorists recognised the importance of the socio-cultural environment on the learner and the learner themselves on the process. The behaviourist theory states that all behaviour is in response to a stimulus. This may be best understood by considering the ideas developed by the physiologist Pavlov during his work with dogs. He realised that the dogs could be conditioned to respond, in this case by salivating, to the noise of a bell. The application of this idea to learning was quickly taken forward by Skinner, who differentiated operant conditioning from this classical conditioning. In operant conditioning, the learner decides to act in a certain way in expectation of a reward or to avoid punishment. Behaviourism is dependent on trial and error. The learner often has to make mistakes to identify the correct behaviour. In behaviourism, the learner is passive. The teacher decides on what behaviour should be rewarded or punished. This approach is most closely associated with training animals and young children. Is it relevant to higher education? Have you used behaviourism in your teaching practice? Was it effective? Cognitivism was developed in response to general dissatisfaction with the behaviourist approach. It recognised that humans are not just programmed to respond, but are rational. Unlike animals with lower intelligence, we can consider the future response of our actions can be. We can also make rational decisions between the reward we are being offered and compare that to our own internal needs and desires. Cognitivism recognised that we have the ability to store, process and retrieve information. If we consider Pavlov's classic experiment with the dogs, which were trained to salivate in response to hearing a bell, as humans we are also trained to respond to a bell. So if you heard a bell ringing in a school building, you would probably identify that with the start or the end of a learning session. If you heard a bell ringing whilst you were on a footpath, you might expect a cyclist to be coming behind you. And then going into a new situation, if you heard a bell ringing in a shopping mall, you would be able to apply that bell to or associate that sound with other information that you have about fire alarms, for example, and leave the building. So although you've never been in a situation where you heard a fire bell before, you would be able to bring the two pieces of information together and respond. In a very basic way, this is what we understand by cognitivism. Psychologists Piaget and Vygotsky, working at the beginning of the 20th century, developed theories on cognitive development through studies with children. Piaget identified 4 stages of intellectual development, the final stage of which, formal operational thinking, emerges at adolescence through to adulthood. Formal operational thinking describes the ability to reason, develop theories, suggest hypotheses, and use logic to develop strategies. Operational thinking, or what we may call today critical thinking, allows us to apply concepts learnt in one context to another. Importantly for higher education, operational thinking, unlike the other 3 stages in Piaget's model, has to be learnt and practiced. Vygotsky, working around the same time, rejected Piaget's idea that development preceded learning and argued that people learn by interacting with knowledgeable others, parents, teachers, or society. Vygotsky described a zone of proximal development, the extent to which a learner, when provided with the appropriate support, can develop their understanding or knowledge. This resonates with more recent work on flow theory, where students learn best when they are engaged in a task that is sufficiently challenging. That is, it is not so simple that they can relax, or so hard that they become anxious. The task is set within their ZPD. As our understanding of cognitivism developed, so did attempts to measure intelligence. IQ tests rank an individual's intelligence in comparison with a group. The mean of any group's IQ is therefore 100. They provide an indication of whether an individual has above, below, or just average intelligence, and they become less accurate the further an individual's score is from the average. By carrying out factor analysis of a range of aptitude tests, Spearman, of Spearman ranked test fame, noticed that people who perform well in one type of cognitive test tended to perform similarly well in others, and those who scored badly would also score badly in other tests. He determined a general intelligence, or G factor, to describe a person's general cognitive ability. This was followed by Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. Gardner identified 8 types of intelligence: verbal, visual, logical, kinesthetic, interpersonal and intrapersonal, musical and naturalistic. However, these intelligences are the results of the skills and abilities that are valued by different cultures and individual preferences, rather than innate differences in cognitive abilities. Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset would suggest that a student could develop these other intelligences with belief and effort. Another psychologist, Cattell, identified 2 types of intelligence, which he called fluid intelligence, the ability to solve new problems, and crystallized intelligence, the ability to recall and use learned knowledge. This theory, which was first put forward in the 60s, is receiving endorsement from modern brain scanning techniques which use functional NMR to identify which parts of the brain are being used to complete certain tasks. Bloom's taxonomy recognises several stages of cognitive complexity, with the lower levels being concerned with crystallizing knowledge and the higher levels developing fluid intelligence.
The constructivist theory is a learning theory which holds that learning is not acquired but is constructed. Students need to actively construct or create new knowledge by processing any new information they come in contact with, taking into consideration their prior unique set of experiences. This constructed knowledge is their own subjective representation of reality, and therefore might not accurately represent reality. It can be altered if new information expands on or tests previous information. Vygotsky added the social perspective of learning to the constructivist theory, creating the term social constructivism. The social constructivist theory still holds that learners actively construct their own learning, but it suggests that they do so in a social context. It rejects the notion that learning can be separated from its social context. The learners continuously construct and amend their knowledge in view of new information, not only by linking to their personal experiences, but also by interaction with environment and other people. In a social constructivist learning environment, the learners receive support from their teacher, peers, and others, which exposes them to new experiences. Social constructivism is closely linked to other learning theories, such as the situated learning theory. They have in common the emphasis on the context or the environment and the importance of interaction and collaboration within a group for learning to happen. The situated learning theory is based on the premise that much of what is learned takes place in the same situation or context in which it is applied. Learning occurs through collaboration, social interaction, and expert modeling within a group. Leuvenwanger, who developed this theory in the early 90s, argued that learning does not happen in traditional learning environments where abstract and out-of-context experiences are presented to the students, but rather when the students are situated in an authentic learning environment where they are able to engage with authentic, real-life experiences and collaborate amongst themselves within what they refer to as a community of practice. There are some pedagogies that support situated learning, such as problem-based learning, where real-world complex problems are provided to the students and they are allowed to work together as a team to come up with a solution. Or peer-assisted learning, where students are supported by other senior students. Can you think of examples of situated learning in your own practice? This diagram shows how situated learning within a community of practice occurs. The term community of practice was coined to refer to a group of people engaged in a process of collective learning. At the center of the community are the experts, or masters. Beginners enter the community of practice from the periphery. Through collaboration, interaction, and engagement, they move towards the center as they learn from the experts and proceed to become experts themselves. Then they pass on the learning to other beginners through the same repeated process. Of course, the key to situated learning is the requirement for an authentic context.
To conclude, this screencast has provided a brief snapshot of some of the different learning theories that have developed over the last 100 plus years. You will know, both from a consideration of these theories and reflecting on how you teach and how you yourself have learnt, that learning is a complex, multi-dimensional process. Learning theories will not provide you with a checklist on how to teach, but a basis on which you can reflect on your own practice and a platform from which you can consider alternative approaches to teaching.